Professor Monroe from the Applied Ethics Department, and in this video we're going to talk about codes of ethics. What we'll do is define what codes of ethics are, talk about how different codes of ethics vary, look at different categories of codes of ethics, and then in subsequent videos we'll talk about the differences between different categories of codes of ethics. First, what is a code of ethics? To define it, we say a code of ethics is a written set of principles and rules intended to serve as a guideline for determining appropriate ethical behavior for those individuals under its authority. We shouldn't confuse a code of ethics with general moral principles or an ethical theory. A code of ethics is basically a formal statement of good intentions from a business or profession, and it's intended to act as a bridge between those loftier moral ideas and the everyday nitty-gritty details of the business world. So it is not meant to be a definitive statement of right or wrong. It's just meant to be a guideline for folks working within a certain context. Codes of ethics differ in three important ways. The first way they differ is by purpose. Although the stated purpose of a code of ethics is to determine appropriate behavior for individuals under its authority, codes of ethics often have secondary purposes. For example, a corporate code of ethics might be to protect the interests of a company, or a professional code of ethics might exist to reassure public trust. The second important difference between codes of ethics is authorship. It should be obvious. Whoever writes the code is going to determine what its focus is. So you can critique a code by looking at who the author of it was, and that's essentially a statement of what that person or those people think is important. So corporate codes, for example, are usually written at the management level or by administrators, and they're typically written for the employers who are further down the ladder. So they end up being rather authoritarian, and typically they exist to protect the company's interests. Professional codes, on the other hand, as we'll see in the subsequent video, are constructed on a peer level, usually written by a team of professionals working in that field, so they tend to be less authoritarian in tone and much more collaborative. Again, understanding or critiquing a code of ethics usually involves looking at whoever the author of the code was. The third, and maybe the most crucial difference between codes of ethics, is what we call the ethical level of a code of ethics. Ethical level refers to how much or how little ethical behavior a code of ethics calls or demands from the people who are under its authority. Some codes ask an awful lot from an ethical perspective. Some codes ask very little. So we can do a taxonomy of codes of ethics according to the degree of ethical behavior to which they call their subjects. The first ethical level is called the basic level. And basic level codes of ethics ask of employees or people in that field that they merely follow the letter of the law. So there's nothing special over and above just doing what's legal. If it's legal to do, then it's okay to do under that code of ethics. If it's illegal to do, then it's wrong to do under that code of ethics. And it's important to distinguish that this is about following the letter of the law, basically the law as it's written. So basic level codes of ethics oftentimes lead to a kind of loophole mentality, where those under its authority can find loopholes for not exactly having to follow the spirit of the code of ethics or the reasons for its being written. So they don't ask very much, basic level codes. The next level up of ethical level we call the currently attainable level. Currently attainable level codes of ethics basically ask of us to do the everyday kinds of moral behaviors that we do anyway by being generally decent people. So when you're under the authority of this kind of code, basically just act like you'd normally act anyway as a decently respectful human being. So don't lie to people, don't cheat, don't steal, and so on. Even if it's not strictly speaking against the law, currently attainable codes of ethics would ask us to act in generally morally acceptable ways. But there's not a lot of special expectations there at the currently attainable level of code. Some careers and some fields demand more of us than that, and so the next level up of codes of ethics is called the practical level. Practical level codes of ethics represent behavior that can be attained by individuals with diligent effort. And here we see the introduction of special obligations that start to blur the distinction between our work life and our out-of-work life. So an example of a special obligation like that might be confidentiality. If you're a psychologist, for example, you're not allowed to disclose what your clients tell you except under certain circumstances, or your patients. So that's a rule that bleeds over into your everyday life that demands more effort to live up to than just sort of being a nice person or currently attainable level of standards. So practical level code is more difficult to live up to, but certain things, certain fields require higher moral expectations than others, and practical level codes are meant to capture that. Now, the final level of code of ethics is called the theoretical level, which represents a code of ethics written near the ethical ideal or basic perfection. So it's meant to call people to very, very high moral standards that are almost impossible to live up to consistently. So theoretical level codes are aspirational in many cases, meaning they try to get us to be better people in addition to sort of conditioning how we act in our professional lives. Theoretical level codes may be appropriate for certain kinds of professions or in certain areas. For example, you can imagine a priest would have a very high level of ethical code that would have to go far above just following the law. So a theoretical level code might be appropriate there. But for other fields, it's not so clear that a theoretical level code is appropriate. For example, if you work at the movie theater, you shouldn't have to be morally perfect. That seems to be kind of nonsensical. So when you're looking at codes of ethics, think about what level of code of ethics or what level of ethics or ethical level your code falls at. Is it basic, currently attainable, practical, or theoretical? There are three different categories of codes that we'll explore in subsequent videos. The first category of code is professional codes of ethics, and those are written to govern the behavior of autonomous independent professionals, as we'll see. Corporate codes of ethics, which are codes of ethics for the business context written by companies. And then the third are government codes of ethics written for public employees. Again, we'll discuss each of those in subsequent videos. We'll go into a little bit more detail. And in the next video, we'll start by talking about professional codes of ethics.